welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking about The New Witch. So this book is a generic witchcraft, really Wicca 101 book. It doesn't really cover anything in depth. For the most part, this book, minus the chapters that are actually having you just jump into doing spells and potions and whatever, it's really your beginner book. It just very briefly covers the topics, and I feel like it doesn't have enough of a lead up for you to really be trying to do the things that it says in the, like, again, the spells and things. Like, it's quite a jump from the random bits that it's telling you to going and doing these things. I feel like it needs much more of a lead up, but for the most part, the majority of this book is just yet another introduction book, giving you the basics that everyone else has already said. Now, for this book, I gave it a 3-star. Sometimes I wanted to drop below the 3. There was a few points that I wanted to move it up to a 4, and then inevitably it brought itself back down. So if you're new, my 3-star is, it can range from it's, it just really wasn't my thing, it's just kind of meh, to it's like, it's not the worst thing ever written, and it's like, well, it could be pretty good, but there's some points that are kind of holding it back. It's really in the middle of the road for me to give a 3-star. And this one, again, it went both ways. The very beginning of the book, I was leaning towards a 2 because there's like a few points that we'll get to that immediately annoyed me. And then there's a couple points that we hit that it was like, wow, this actually is pretty cool. I hadn't thought of that. Like, there's a section very briefly on like a wishing stone that I was like, it's kind of cool. And, a couple little things like that you don't usually see in books, and it's like, all right, kind of cool. Maybe I'm being a little judgy. Maybe it's actually a good book. And then it fixed itself and moved itself right back down because it has one of the classics that immediately puts it as a red flag kind of a book. And I'll get to the specifics, but basically, if you don't want to watch the whole video, the thing was that anytime a witchcraft book tells you that modern medicine is toxic and poisonous, you should not really trust the author. It doesn't matter what else they've said. That's a big red flag. They should not be discrediting and harming their audience by telling them not to use medicine. That's just a big red flag to me. And immediately drops it a star, which is kind of, you only have 5 to use, so if you're losing a whole one, that's kind of a big deal. And it's just not great. It doesn't matter what else you've written. It really, really harms whatever point you're trying to make. So the intended audience for this book, I think, is for the beginner that just wants another book to reiterate the exact same points that every other book has made in a way to help solidify the information to you. Because if you've read any other beginner book, you've read this book. There was really nothing new that was enough to stand out, to be like, you got to go buy this book. And really, most of the points have been made better by other authors. And for the most part, you're just reading this to reread the same points that other people have already told you about. So let's move on to some of the specific things from this book that stood out to me. First is the chapters are not numbered. And it's a random thing, but it really bothers me, especially as somebody who reads a lot. I plan my day around how many chapters a book has. And so when it's not listed and I can't find it, and I have to take the time to sit and count out how many chapters there are, it's annoying. And it's a small thing, but it's really obnoxious. Like, it's kind of a publishing standard that nearly every book will have their chapters numbered. And most of the time, pagan books, we won't have sections, like section 1, 2, 3, part 1, 2, 3, and then within those, it's still numbered chapters. So to not have that was incredibly obnoxious. And again, it's a small point, but nonetheless, it immediately kickstarted me to be annoyed with the book. As I was reading, the most common thing I kept thinking is that there's nothing in here that really is standing out. Now, when I looked at the title and I looked at the cover of this book, I thought New Witch was going to be kind of aiming towards talking about witchcraft in our now modern era, because a lot of the books that are listed as the new generation are now like getting close to 30 years old. And so I thought maybe it was going to be talking more about, the things you have to deal with as a new witch coming in that we didn't have to. Even when I started almost 15 years ago, it is very different. You have witch talk and the witches of Instagram and like all of the many, many, many channels and various social media sites that have witches talking everywhere, blogs galore. And so, like, I figured it was going to be talking about that. I mean, the cover shows like a phone with various apps relating to witchcraft. So I figured it would be more along those lines. And I'm going to admit, I was pretty disappointed to find out it was just another generic witchcraft book. The history is kind of like whatever. Again, like, I'm really tired of reading the supposed history of witchcraft. It's something that always just kind of bores me. And going through the basics again, without really adding anything new to it, no new perspective, really nothing new. It's just regurgitated information. It got old really fast. So with that, I took a break from this book for a minute and I was thinking maybe I'm just being way too harsh. And so when I came back to it, I was like, okay, maybe I was being a little harsh, because when I got to the section that was talking about the wishing stone, as I mentioned earlier, it was different. It was unique. I liked that. If you haven't read this book, the premise is that when you're off on like a hike or whatever, and you find a really pretty rock and you're like, ooh, shiny, because most of us are the magpies. We're like, ooh, shiny, pretty. And we love to collect rocks. And so you grab the rock and you make a wish. And then you keep this stone with you. You maybe put it on your altar or on your bedside table, keep it in your pocket, whatever. And you keep it with you and you kind of infuse it with your wish that you have. When it manifests into reality or you no longer want it or whatever, then you thank the stone and you place it back out in nature to be found by somebody else to be their witching stone. And I loved that idea. I was like, that's really cool. And going along with the good points of this book, there were quite a few sections that were talking about, you know, the safety of your crystals with water and with sunlight. Not a lot of books talk about that. So it's really nice when they include that. And there was even specific lists of like, hey, these are like pretty common that you're going to stumble across that, you know, a lot of witches are going to like gravitate towards. They're not kind of the rare ones. And these are the ones that like you shouldn't put in water. And I think she even included like labradorite, which was like, I didn't know you couldn't put that in water. I usually don't, but good to know. And like sunlight, that you shouldn't put certain ones out in the sun because it will, you know, change the color. And so it was really cool to have that included. And I was like, wow, maybe this book is actually good. At least they're including information that especially older books don't always include. And it's like, cool, you're doing great. Love this. It's going pretty good. Maybe this actually could be a good book. But as we know in life, good things cannot last. So the streak that it was going on immediately failed. I mentioned this earlier, and it's when authors talk about modern medicine in a very negative way. Well, this comes from page 183 in particular, and she's talking about herbs and how you should use them opposed to pills and other pharmaceuticals because they are chemicals and toxins. That's not completely accurate. It could be, but not really in the way they're trying to say it is. Because there's plenty of like more of the fitness people talk about this who are trying to debunk the like fitness people that are just trying to sell you a product. And, you know, a lot of the things that are labeled as a chemical and a toxin, it's like moderation and how much and like context, because like everything is really made up of chemicals. Like your whole body is made of chemicals. If you ask a chemist, they can explain that to you far better than I could. But a basic understanding of science is knowing that chemistry and toxins is very niche and very specific in using those terms. And so for an author just to throw that out, you know what they're trying to say. They're trying to push the classic thing of, well, nature knows best. Nature also was the one that gave you the chemicals and the toxins, supposedly. That is modern medicine. Because, duh, we're not getting our chemicals and our medications from Mars. Like, it's still from the Earth. It's still natural. We're just utilizing it slightly differently. And regardless, like, we should not be, especially for a beginner book, telling you that your medicine is bad. That's super harmful, very misinformative, because most of the time your medications are not a problem. Your doctor isn't prescribing them willy-nilly because they have their entire career on the line if they mess up. Like, they're not just going to prescribe you a medication just because. It's quite hard to get pills, and most of the time they're fine. Occasionally you're going to have some issues, but those are pretty rare instances. And to say that modern medicine, your pills, your pharmaceuticals are so terrible, I hate when authors talk about it like that. I have a bit of a bias on this, but I feel like it's a justified bias because without modern medicine, I would not be having this conversation with you. I would be dead. I would not have seen the age 5. Probably even sooner, to be honest, but definitely age 5 I wouldn't have seen. I would have died when I was 4 without modern medicine. Most of us have probably had a situation by this point that without modern medicine, you wouldn't have lived. So, like, we need to not demonize the modern medicines that we have. They're great. Like, I don't know why authors feel the need to get on this bandwagon. It gives us a bad name. It makes us come across as a bit of like an MLM, trying to sell you a supplement, trying to sell you this like crazy woo-woo thing where you don't need your medications that have been proven to be fine. Nah, use this random plant. It should do the same thing, kind of, ish. Despite the fact that our ancestors died from very curable things, and, we don't need to necessarily give up modern medicine. Just, it's a soapbox that I will always stand on because I think it is so horrible for an author to demonize medications because you aren't a medical professional. I can guarantee you this person who wrote the book has never gone to medical school and probably has not had a lot to do with the medical field anyways. I've worked in medicine and I've lived in medicine. Again, I have a rare disorder, so I was in the hospital for most of my early life. And even to this day, I have to actively, be an advocate for myself because doctors don't know about things. And even with that, I still trust modern medicine. It's not a toxin. It's not bad. It keeps people alive. I always come back to the thing of, it's like trying to tell a diabetic that they can't have insulin because it's a toxin. Stop. It will kill them if they don't have it. Same with a lot of other medications. Sometimes you can get healthy and get off of them. Sometimes not. It extends your life. It's great. It's not bad. And it has nothing to do with witchcraft. Stop demonizing it. That was my last major point that I wanted to talk about because from that point forward, I was just annoyed at the author and, there's other points that you could bring up. She very much has a bias that she's pushing on what witchcraft needs to look like. You need to compost and it's you don't. It's great if you want to do that. That's cool. I don't have any desire to do that, but if you want to, great. And that you need to do all of these very eco-conscious things, which is cool, isn't necessarily a requirement of witchcraft, especially for a beginner. No, I feel like that kind of moves into an intermediate category when you know the basics and you can see how to fit it into your own life. For some people, the environment isn't going to be the thing they fight for. They might fight for social justice. And they might fight for other things. They might be more of an activist. Again, there's the whole Dianic Wicca, and the feminist witchcraft movements, that's their focus. And there's others that focus more on political things. There's just a certain point when you hit into the intermediate category of what's going to be your thing that you work towards. And sometimes it is trying to figure out how you can lessen your impact on the world. For the most part, the average person isn't going to be the issue. It's corporations. And so, trying to shame people because they don't want to compost and trying to tell you ways to do it in, urban living is just a little silly, honestly. But, and there's other points in here. There's, a thing about the red tint, which, whatever. And there's always, a toss-out when that's mentioned of, well, dudes could do it, too, if they wanted. If you don't know what a red tent is, it's a movement that I don't know when it started, but it is for women together once a month to have time when they're on their cycle to get together and chit chat and have a coven basically. And there's always and dudes can do it too if they want, but it's a girls only club. I'm not a big fan of girls only clubs. I'm not a fan of any exclusionary clubs really. So, there's just a variety of different points, but the big one was the medicine. And that was the last major point that I wanted to touch on. So I would love to know your thoughts on this book in the comments down below. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons. If you want to support me and get access to exclusive content, I've got a bunch of stuff coming next year. It is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all soon. Blessed be.